Hi everyone, it's Natalie here. Welcome to my channel. Um, this is a VR to Eline Eugenie over at her channel by the same name. Um, she has been doing some tantric-based practice in Tumo specifically. So Tumo awakens, as I understand it, it awakens like the Shakti energy in the body, and it's also referred to as Kundalini. So I don't know which of the videos will come out first, whether it's going to be this one or if it's going to be the Kundalini video that I made, but a couple days ago. But one way or the other, they'll all get put out there. Anyway, in the midst of all of her experiences with all of this, she has been talking about some of the contact that she's had with different deities from those lineages. And my own experience of working with the Tibetan practices is that if you're coming to it really sincerely engaging in those practices, your teachers will help you tremendously along the way in whatever way they can. But the practices themselves are going to teach you as much, or more. And that is how they're designed. I finally realized at a certain point, like, oh, that's kind of how they're designed. They're designed so that you are put in touch with with the deities as they exist both outside of you, as their own thing, and as they exist within you, right, as part of you. And then the ways in which you engage with the divinity. What do we call it? We call it yoga, deity yoga, right? So that the deity yoga itself is deeply transformative. It brings these deities up inside of you who already exist there as part of who you are, naturally, on a very primordial level, right? We all have that capacity. We all have that capability. How awake it is what tends to be, to differ, right? But it can, of course, be awakened, and it can, of course, be brought to the surface and cultivated and developed. And they seem to want that for us. They really do. It's a really profoundly humbling experience to engage, and it is deeply transformative. So, what a place to start! What a place to start. So, so specifically, as Eline was doing some videos about working with a deck that she has created and is creating in the process of creating, where she's creating some amazing cards that I really would love to try, and I'm gonna have to see if I can either get a color printer or just hijack my mom and dad's and go buy loads of ink and go to their house at some point, and just print loads of stuff that I want to play with and work with. But suffice it to say, Eline has been doing a beautiful job with those. And one of the deities that she had picked out in a video where she was doing some instruction about how she's, what her process has been, is Vajrasattva. So here is Vajrasattva. And Vajrasattva, this is taken from the Buddha Wisdom Shakti Power deck by Lara Shanti with Yeshe Sogyal on the cover. She's one of my favorites. I love her. So this is Vajrasattva. Vajrasattva, and this is true, Vajrasattva is the father of the 5 Buddha families, which is a concept that was really confusing to me, but I have more videos that are going to be coming out about that, very specifically, because it relates to the Buddha Tarot. So there's some overlap that's kind of fun, and I thought it'd be neat to explore that. So we'll be talking about that at some point, but for now, Vajrasattva is sort of the deity that is invoked at the end of most of the practices that we do. I have some incense burning in here, which was necessary. I'll just go into this briefly, but suffice it to say, I am fostering 2 cats right now, and I'm falling completely in love with them. But what I had not counted on, I knew that was a likely thing, but what I had not counted on was what it would be like to have 2 cats and a litter box in the house, and what it would do to the fragrance of the whole household. And may I just say, it can be strong enough to gag a maggot off a gut wagon. And, this morning it has been. So the incense has been necessary, as well as some frequent cleanouts. I'm hoping that once we're through their worming pills, this will be done, right? At this level of strength will be done, right? But I'll introduce them at some point soon. I really will, and they're wonderful. I can't wait to introduce them to everyone. Anyway, we invoke Vajrasattva at the end of most practices. There's a 100-syllable mantra that we invoke at the end of every practice, basically to ask for, if we've messed anything up, if we've done anything wrong, or basically he's there to correct the spell, right? To correct the practice, perfect it so that its benefit for all beings can then be offered, into the greater world, right? The greater universe, all realms of existence, right? Without any preference for one over another. So that was my first introduction to Vajrasattva. And I had a friend that I met on retreat 2 years ago when I was first introduced to Tantric Buddhism in the first place. Her wonderful woman, her name's Maya. And if you've ever seen the movie Wild Wild Country about Rajneeshpuram, she was part of that and lived there, and has been sort of, I think, reestablishing and re-understanding her sense of spirituality and how that all functions in the time since in the most wonderful way. Like an incredibly beautiful woman and human being who I really should reach out to. I miss her. I haven't heard from her in a while, but I remember she told me, if you're ever in a really bad place where you've done something that you regret and you can't quite move past, invoke Vajrasattva. She said she had a moment in her life, and I won't give the details, but it was a very difficult moment. She was really feeling a need to repent over something that she felt she had done that was not in alignment with her integrity. And so she said she went to her shrine room and shut the door and just sat down and rocked and kept saying that syllable, calling to Vajrasattva over and over and over and over again. And she said eventually that this sort of profound peace washed over her, and really made her almost become like a devotee to Vajrasattva in her own way, because the power of that practice and the power of that mantra and of his presence was so transformative and life-changing for her. Not hard to do. You can find the 100-syllable Vajrasattva Mantra. It's a real mouthful there. It can be found online very easily. Of course, there are also people who've recorded it, like musically, so that you can kind of like, sing along and have a good time. I know. What's the word I want? You can kind of kirtan with Vajrasattva a little bit, which is not something I've tried personally. Maybe I should. But it is a really helpful mantra, deeply helpful. So there's that. The way that I have personally connected with Vajrasattva on my own and in my own practice is through the practice known as Jitro, and I'm sure I'm writing that, spelling it just here below. And Jitro is one of many practices that come from the Tibetan traditions and culture that is to do with death and dying. This is what drew me to the Tibetan practices in the first place. And that's also kind of what I outlined in my response to Eline and why she wanted to know like more about those experiences. It could take me 3 hours, 6 hours to go through all of them and do them any justice. I'm gonna try to offer what I can here without violating the integrity of that practice or the integrity of the people about whom I'm going to speak that influenced me in that direction. Yeah. So at the beginning of 2018, in January, I remember getting a phone call from my sister, and right as I got home to the house, I think I'd been at school probably rehearsing something with the students, and went into my mom and dad's house. At that time, I was living in my tiny house on their property, but I would come home, drive into their garage, or I didn't really park in the garage. I'd park next to the garage, but I'd come in through there, use the bathroom, chat with my parents, grab the dog, and then go down to the house. And when I walked in, they were in shock, and they were watching TV, and on the news was my former partner. I feel like it's probably okay to say his name. His name was Nathan. And he was a very talented musician and pianist and composer, and just an all-around amazing human being. And he was on the news because he'd gone missing. And I knew right away that that he was still alive, and I could almost tap into his energy and track him. Suffice it to say, I could go into that in more detail, and I think I have at some point, actually in an early video from when I first started the channel a couple years ago. But what essentially unfolded was a 5 days period during which he was missing, and at night, I'd go to sleep and dream about him at night, and I knew that he had died at a certain point because he came to me in a dream, and I could see him clearly. And I had been tracking him. So in that dream, I was still tracking him, but I was in my car. It was very real. It was a really, hard dream. It's one of those few dreams where it's so real, it's more real than real life in a way. The details were such that as I recalled them later and then looked at the real life location where they took place in the dream, there were details about it that I hadn't even noticed before when it was something I drove past every day. I mean, it was so real. It was real. But in the dream, he was not himself. I felt like he was in his death state. He was getting out of his car and pulling all of this lumber out of his car, and just throwing it in this person's driveway. And I remember I approached him really slowly, like he was unkempt and just not at all himself, but yet I could kind of recognize that part of him, that state that he was in was something that I knew was a possibility within him when we were together. We parted amicably. We didn't part because we didn't love each other. We had a 10-year age difference, and I was at a point where I wanted very, very different things than he did. I was in my late 30s, he was in his late 20s. And so, and we were both artists, and my life was heading more in the direction of quiet and contemplation and things that were not comfortable for him at all. And he was headed more in a direction of wanting to travel and wanting to be more expansive, which I wasn't comfortable with because I'd already done it. So, we parted ways because of that, not because of a lack of love. Um, and so that connection remained, even though it was really almost too painful even to be friends, actually. You know, but when he was there and he's pulling this lumber out of his car, like 2x4s, 2x6, really 2x6, they were big. I mean, it was big lumber. It wasn't small lumber. It was probably like 2x6, and shoving him, throwing him out on the ground and everything. He was missing his front teeth. So the top two and the lower two that were in the front were just gone. And there was like black around the inside of his lips. And in my mind, I immediately, as I was in the dream, assumed that he must have died by suicide and by a gunshot. That was my assumption. But as I looked and looked and looked, afterward, like on an astral level, it wasn't what I was getting. And it did turn out, actually, sorry, the next day or in the following days, I found out that he had died by suicide. And he had died the night that I saw him. And he had died. He'd driven from St. Louis to Oregon to the West Coast. I think my sense tells me that he'd gotten to the coast, spent the night, didn't know what to do next, turned around to drive back in the direction of home, and then made a split-second choice, that this was the only way to do it, to drive off the road. And he drove into a parked lumber car on a train track, that was not moving anywhere, and it was bad. But again, another detail that clarified like why he would be pulling lumber out of his car. And I haven't. I mean, until a few years ago, the last 10 to 12 years is really the time period where I've really stopped working, like mediumistically with spirits that have passed or like crossed, and instead seem to be working, more able to connect with spirits who have not crossed. My early life, I was more of a medium. Like I trained traditionally in mediumship at the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain in Belgrave Square in London. So I worked with them for 8 or 10 years while I was living there. And I had my own practice as a spirit medium and so on. And when I moved back to the States, right beforehand, I'd had a couple of experiences that told me I didn't really want to do it anymore. Again, that's in another video. I'll have to make sure I link those. But I was done. I kind of felt done with it. And before long, it became clear why, because I really, there was a purpose more in, there has become over time, like a very clear purpose in dealing with or working more with people who are not happily crossed over to the other side. Right. So what I tend to see now are people who are stuck here or stuck between, or people who are in kind of like, that space between, after, immediately following death, before crossing, before moving on, tends to be where I get the most, it's usually I'm usually not intending to look. It just that it tends to just come up. It happens. I hear or see or encounter with these individuals. So when I went out to the into the ether to kind of look, I could see Nathan, and I could see that it wasn't and it obviously wasn't a gunshot. So I was looking for like, what was the mouth thing about? And I'm trying to remember. I know I wrote this down somewhere, but it became clear to me that this is so hard to talk about. For so many reasons. It's also just hard because it still really hurts to have made this discovery about him. But it did. I should say too, like, he's okay now, right? He's okay now, and he's okay now because of Vajrasattva. He made that shift. He moved. He's gone. He's not here anymore. And it happened because of that practice, because of Jitro, because of Vajrasattva. In Buddhism, there is a space that we can sometimes fall into, both as embodied humans, right, and also, as a psychological state, but also as a spiritual place when we're no longer in our bodies, which is known as being a hungry ghost. I did not believe in that at the time this happened. I really didn't believe in that. I just have to put my slippers on. My feet are freezing. Hang on. Okay, that's better. So when your feet are freezing and you can't, it's so distracting. So yeah, I didn't believe in this stuff. I really didn't. It was not something that I intended to like buy into. It was just, I don't know how to verbalize this appropriately in a way that will, eradicate doubt or questions for anyone else. I just don't. And certainly I think having questions and having some rational, like, doubt, is really normal, right? It's normal and probably appropriate. So I'm not here to try and convince anybody of this. I'm just, this is really just me sharing like what happened, for whatever that's worth. Suffice it to say, it became clear to me that was where he was, and it scared the shit out of me, and it grieved me horribly to think of that. He didn't believe in Buddhism. That was another thing. Here I was, I'd been practicing so deeply and so forth, and he waited until like right before we split to be like, I just don't believe in it. I don't believe in it. I don't believe in Catholicism either. I don't believe in any of it. Which just made me laugh. I was like, well, you could have, it's okay. I've never asked you to buy in. It's fine. But, yeah, I'm really struggling for words here. It's hard to again, it's hard to name, it's hard to talk about. But the experience really made me think, like, I remember sitting with my therapist for hours, talking it through, all of this through, and just saying, like, what do I do? What do I do? I don't know who to talk to. I don't have a teacher. I don't, and she, of course, didn't question. She really has been very good at, like, saying, like, I get it. It's not a rational experience. So you're not going to feel comfortable with it. I get it, and maybe there's some truth behind it. Maybe there's something worth investigating further, because you seem very convinced by what your experience has been with this. And I was. So I began just kind of looking at different things, because, in Korean Zen Buddhism, the way it was very exoteric, very like, question everything, don't accept anything at face value, question yourself, question others, question all of it. It's not, doubt is like, it's like almost like fundamentalism, doubt as a fundamentalist practice, in mostly in a healthy way, but sometimes in a less healthy way, like many things. But So in that exploration, I encountered with Tibetan Buddhism and various other things, but without really connecting any dots, right? Without really getting it or connecting dots fully, I signed up to do a retreat at Tara Mandala, and mainly because I felt like I could trust Lama Tsultrim, and I felt like I could because she was she is so human. She's just so human and down to earth. And when she writes about her own struggles as a human being, she writes about them with great candor and authenticity and honesty. So she doesn't try to convince you that she has spiritually bypassed and overcome anything. She's very clear that, like, she's just a person, and I would say she probably has had some very profound experiences of enlightenment, but it doesn't change the fact that she's just a person. She's just who she is. So I felt comfortable and able to go work with her. So I found myself at Tara Mandala, and heard various people talk about, and told them what I was planning to do as a doula, and that I had heard there were several practices that might relate to death, right? That I might be able to explore further. And people there were beautiful about helping me be put in touch with all of that. So at a various point, I received the transmission to be able to practice Jitro, and then began to practice it. And just looking at time, because I know this is going on. And I knew going into it that well, I knew that I wouldn't have a lot of guidance going into it. Let's put it that way. I worked with a couple of teachers a few times so that I could at least know the practice and how it, its order, the tunes of the different mantras, how to move forward with it, what the visualizations in theory were kind of like, but I never had any real formal instruction. So I took what little I had and decided to practice very fervently, to help mainly to help Nathan. And so essentially the way the practice functions, right? It is a profound experience of Deity Yoga. So in this practice, you start by embodying and uniting. You invoke, as you always do at the beginning of practices. You take refuge. You invoke that which, the image and the energy of that which you will take refuge within. And then, you begin to invoke the embodiment of that deity. So, in Jitro, it's like Vajrasattva on. No, Nat, no. I was about to say it's like Vajrasattva on crack, but it's not. That's a terrible description. It is Vajrasattva empowered by the entire refuge tree. So it's not just Vajrasattva, it is Vajrasattva and all of the peaceful deities, the Rigdzin and the wrathful deities. And they occupy all through him and within him. And he is embodying them, and then you are embodying him as he embodies them, right? Big Deity Yoga. And so when I started that practice, that part of it was not fully clear yet. So I remember, I would go out, I don't think I realized for a long time that what I do and have been doing for a long time, when I do like a loving kindness practice for someone, is journeying. But what I would do is basically journey, and as myself, to go to, I would track where is that person, where is that individual, where is their energy, and then draw it back, into this kind of field that was being created. But I initially started that practice, kind of engaging, Nathan as myself. Well, unsurprisingly, very little happened. Very, very little happened. it seemed to help him a little bit. He would seem to have more energy at the end of it. You visualize the deceased person, and then you're basically giving them mantras that empower and strengthen and restore their primordial purity. And I think this is my I may have that wrong, because again, I'm interpreting this based on what happens in that practice as I do it, right? I don't know. I can't, again, I can't speak with any authority about it. I can speak only of my experience. But it would seem that he would have more energy. He would feel better. He'd be a little more like himself. So it was helping him, I guess, in very tiny increments, right? And at a certain point, I also welcomed in, almost like as helpers, because they just sort of were there one day. They just sort of appeared. Two friends of mine that I've known from high school. And again, I always feel guilty, like I shouldn't say their names, but I will anyway. Their names are Grace and Carissa. And, when you go to school with people and we were in choir and drama and everything together. And Grace was in some of my like advanced classes that I did. And I mean, we were in all different year groups and so on, but we all became kind of close in our way, but hadn't stayed in touch as adults. But when they both died, I went to both of their funerals, and had some very beautiful experiences of them, after they had passed and while they were in that sort of, I guess, what we would call bardo phase. So as I was doing doing this practice, at some point, Carissa and Grace showed up and they offered to just be there, like to help hold space with me. So I wondered if maybe they were going to become like spirit guides of some kind, not realizing that at that time, that had they themselves moved on, right, beyond, the bardo, beyond this space, that they would not be appearing there. They would not be appearing there. And I didn't realize that at first. So on the practice went, and then one day a friend of mine, who's a doula, asked, would you be willing to try offering Jitro to this client that I'm working with, who is suffering horribly, and their death process is not a comfortable one, or I mean, it's just awful. Is there anything that you could do? So I offered to do Jitro because I didn't know what else to do. And again, I tracked the person, went to them, and something in that practice started to shift. And it seemed I was more aware of Vajrasattva as part of that practice, and less aware of myself. And at that point, then every time I practiced, I realized I was investing more and more and more in the Deity Yoga, and in that in the mantras of that invoke Vajrasattva. So again, it continued, and then, and I would sit down, and what began to happen is that I would invoke that space. But the mistake I didn't realize I was not supposed to make was that I would start that practice. I would step away from the Deity Yoga as myself to greet my friends in that space. So I would greet Carissa and Grace, and I would greet Nathan, and that was a mistake, because it's attachment. It's a form of attachment. And so what would happen, or what eventually began to happen, was that I was less and less able to connect with them directly, but I wasn't aware of why. And then one day it occurred to me, like I finished a practice and recognized, it was like I was being told, they're not your guides. Your friends are not there to be your guides. They're there because they need the mantras. They have not, they're not going, Carissa's not going home to look after her nieces, and Grace is not going home to look after her son. They're not in physical bodies anymore, right? They're not, it's a what they're doing is a delusion, because they are themselves deluded right now about what their existence is. So, that was horrifying, to realize. And, I can't remember if it overlapped with when my friend, my doula friend, called me and asked if I would help with her nephew, who was only 34 and had a sudden death. He died in a motorcycle accident, and he died in a motorcycle accident on the West Coast in Oregon. So before the practice started, I went out to kind of track his energy so that I could know what it was in order to invite him into that practice. And then I remember I think it was right around that time, like it really stuck, like that I was really, what I really needed to do was embody that deity yoga to the exclusion of any identification as Natalie, in this body, in this, all of it basically. And it was the first time that I didn't have my friends. I didn't have, Grace here and Carissa here, on either side of me helping. And instead it was like they're like in this field, but like in front. And I realized they didn't recognize me. That they weren't seeing me. They were seeing the deity. They were seeing Vajrasattva. And that was the day that was the practice time when everything shifted, because suddenly I realized it too. And that was the first time I really got Nathan to engage in that practice. So they were there, frequently they would want to be there to help. They'd want to offer support to the person that was there. I think I asked as Vajrasattva for them to gather around this young man who was the nephew. And I could see there was some, because of the similarity in age and time of death and location of death, something like that seemed to make Nathan feel capable of engaging with this other young man. And the girls felt like they wanted to engage as well. And that shifted all of them away. And, I practiced really regularly for him, like as prescribed, like every week at the day of his death, on the day of the nephew's death, for my friend. And each week I would see they were different. All four of them were different. They were shifting and changing, and their energy was different. And, everything about them was very different. And, by week 6, as we did like the last one, as I did the last Jitro for this young man, they all went. They all went away, and were gone. And you finish that, and you're not like, I cried a little bit, kind of like it tears me up now to think about it, but it wasn't a sad thing. I mean, I felt sad because it meant I wasn't going to see them anymore. But by the time that happened, I also recognized it had been a long time since Natalie was seeing them. And instead, what was happening, like the sun comes out right as they, um, instead what was happening was that they were seeing Vajrasattva, and I was seeing them through that filter, right, of Vajrasattva and all of the Rigdzin. Um, yeah, and the whole refuge tree. I wasn't seeing them. I wasn't really part of that anymore. I realized I wasn't. That practice wasn't happening because I did anything, right. Other than just to show up, and to be willing, to be the vehicle for it, right. Um, it's a very profound experience of not of um, non-egoic engagement, because my allowing any part of Natalie into that practice was really not very helpful. No one ever told me that was a thing, right? No one in the learning around it, which was very minimal. Again, I didn't learn much. Nobody ever said, like, whatever you do, don't do this, or um, but what I recognized at a certain, the deities taught. They will tell you. Um, they will tell you. They will instruct. They will, and they do in those practices. The lineage itself, will also correct things, or you can feel it almost pull you, back in line or back in order. Um, but it's very freeing. Like after that practice, when I finish it, whenever I do it, it leaves me feeling completely calm and peaceful, restored, relaxed. I wouldn't say that it leaves me free of ego, but it's kind of a relief from it. It's a relief, um, from being, res- we're all restrained a little bit by the egoic, not attachment, but just identification, right? Identification. And it's a little break from that, but it also places the awareness of that of the fact of ego identification back on you, because at a certain point in that practice, you can't not be aware that you're just the vehicle. Like, you're just holding that space so that can happen, right? You're the engine behind it, because it needs energy, and it needs a vehicle, but you're not driving it really, or you're kind of just I don't know. I'm not coming up with the right analogy, but like, maybe you're just I'm just the chauffeur, um, if that, because I'm kind of driving it, but the practice almost just comes through on its own. I guess, yeah, you're driving the vehicle so that, like, the Pope, if it's the Pope mobile, the Pope is in there, like, doing his, like, hey everybody, how are you? And I'm just I'm just in the car driving the car. That's probably the best analogy. You're not really the great and powerful Oz. The great and powerful Oz is what's standing in you, and through you, coming through you. But it's not you. It's definitely not you. But it's also not separate from you. Um, the you that it's just that the you that you think you are is not that. It's just not that. I think. I mean, I don't know. I'm still like, I'm still integrating a lot of this. I'm still trying to understand it better. I've never really had a teacher to talk to about it, that I speak to regularly. And I think, a big thing I want to do for next year is get involved in one of the formal study programs with Tara Mandala, which I didn't want to do because of the experiences that I've had with seminary and going through 2 different seminary programs, like you know starting them and not completing them and all of that. But at this point, I recognize like this is a trustworthy. It's been 2 years, which is longer than I spent with either organization previously in seminary. So um, I've had the time to be in those practices, doing them and experiencing them now for a couple of years, and they've really, they have me utterly convinced, of where this is what I need to be doing, that this is what I need to be doing. So that will continue, and I'll be able to talk to a teacher at that point, and just say, look, I need to talk about Jitro. I've never had any formal instruction around it, and I also just kind of need to run past some of these basic principles of doing that practice. But my sense of it is it's more about refining it, because I don't think my teachers will tell me any differently. But just sitting here looking at my image here of Vajrasattva, my sense is that probably if what is taking place is what the if you could say there's a goal, is supposed to be happening, is happening, and there's a deeper experience of deity and of the qualities of that deity and of embodying them, and of being less restricted by egoic identification, that probably that's a good thing. I'm going to say that, I'm going to go out on a limb here, that, if those are the goals, basic goals in Buddhist practice, and that those are being, on some level, being touched into, that probably, I'm on the right track, right? Yeah. But so that's my Vajrasattva experience in a nutshell. So there we go. So it may only be Eline who really watches this. There may be a few of you who get partway through it. I don't know. We'll find out. Feel free to ask any questions you might have, and to engage or not engage. That's all good. All of it's good. So yeah, and thank you to Eline for just asking. I don't think I really would have felt like it was something worth sharing or even talking about, if you hadn't said, like, I'd really like to know more about what happened or what that experience was for you. So thank you. It's nice to meet another, person in the community that has such just a deep experience of these things, and can really, that feels able to talk about them so openly. So it's empowered me to feel able to do that as well. So thank you. All right, folks. See you again soon. Bye.